So we are lucky enough on this panel discussion today to have great speakers, thought leaders, and practitioners. Here we have with us today Deborah Smith. Deborah is from the Constraint Management Group, and you heard probably her presenting the DVOM model and how it applies, for instance, in complex ETO environments. Chad Smith is with us as well. I think Chad doesn't need to be introduced to the Demand-Driven community. He's a co-founder of the Demand-Driven Institute. Deepak Mavator from Tata Consultancy Services is involved in significant worldwide implementations of DMRP and demand-driven transformations. And Barry Anderson from Coca-Cola Beverages Africa is leading the rollout of DMRP across how many countries in Africa?
9 at the moment.
9 and many plants and distribution centers, right?
Yes.
So thank you all for being with us. We have collected a number of questions during the conference. And maybe we'll start the discussion on artificial intelligence, and because we had a couple of conferences this morning on the topic. So the first question is the following. The demand-driven adaptive enterprise model is very much relying on human intelligence, so the teams get access to relevant information and make educated decisions. AI, ML gets a lot of attention those days. What is your perspective on what should human and artificial intelligence role be in supply chain management? And a bit provocative, should our supply chains be managed by humans or by human intelligence or artificial intelligence? Who wants to take the question? And it's really open to all of you.
I'll take a first run at it real quick. I mean, I think fundamentally the real question here is, can technology better enable our operational adaptation and learning? And I don't think there's any question that the answer is yes. Now, to what extent, to where you focus and how you attenuate that technology is the whole ballgame. So this whole idea that demand-driven doesn't allow for technology to come to bear, or for AI or ML, it's a completely false narrative. But what we are saying is that you can't just speed up the wrong rules, all right? You can't focus the technology in the wrong area. You got to focus it in the tactical and strategic areas that allow the model to adapt over time and really bring to bear the power of that kind of technology. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
My 2 cents is that I agree with Chad, and where human intelligence comes into is in the execution. So when you're looking behind the scenes in the data analysis, if it's the right rules, artificial intelligence has a really good role to play. And in fact, we're seeing, the things that DD Tech is doing and that we're doing behind the scenes in terms of what we want to move into the software is really what makes sense. But the thoughtware portion of demand-driven is not going to change. At the end of the day, somebody has to prioritize what is the strategy, make people come together, reconcile across the environments, and that requires people making decisions. Relevant information can still have artificial intelligence adding to the right mix, as long as they use the right rules.
Any other insights on this human versus artificial intelligence question?
So if I add a couple of thoughts, taking the entire supply chain into the picture, the answer is absolutely yes. I know Eric always fancies this idea of, if the aeroplanes can drive, why cannot the supply chain be, right? While it may not be as simple as that, but I am definitely a fan of what I believe as self-healing, self-automated supply chain. It does not mean that the people like us who are the practitioners are not going to have a say. Certainly you're going to have a say where we can look into those insights that AI and ML can do much better than human mind, and then decide how you're going to adapt it, right? That way we can focus on the things that where we need to focus on, and rather than trying to figure out a lot of those noise that gets generated. So from that perspective, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And within our own company, TCS, we are working with various clients where we are, trying to move in that the conversation in that direction. So absolutely, just a matter of few years where we are going to see AI and ML doing a lot more than what it is doing today.
So that question that is not that was not collected during the conference, but aren't you afraid that there may be a black box effect with artificial intelligence that may not be easy to cope with in the VOM model? What are your thoughts?
No, I am not afraid, right? Because any of those artificial intelligence or an ML is an output of how we want to structure it, right? And I definitely would urge everybody not to worry about some kind of a science fiction scenario where something is going to come and take over. Not that, right? So certainly, if we are smart, the things we can only tell the algorithms what it should learn. We cannot tell how it should learn. So when it learns and then comes back, still, I think Deborah made a point. Our value is going to make sure that we execute it. So certainly we should be able to apply our discretion, and we are going to learn along the way, right? Because sometimes the AI is also going to give you a correlation, not necessarily a causation. That's where it's going to be an evolution, but I don't see that getting out of control.
Okay.
I don't think Bernard, it's going to. I think the users are going to be the final arbiter on this at the end of the day anyway, because if they don't buy in, it's not going to go anywhere. We've seen with other black box solutions that if they don't trust it, they don't understand it, it's not going to work. And we've seen that the supply chain community is a very conservative buyer mindset. As I've always said, it's not like going from MySpace to Facebook over the weekend. It's a casual decision you're making here. So I think it's going to be all about ourselves and any other vendors in the industry earning that trust, right? Doing it in a manner that makes sense and is intuitive and is seen as beneficial. I still think there'll be some change management discussions to have on that front, but I certainly think it's something we'll all have to earn as technology providers.
I'll just kind of throw something in here too, since you said the magic black box word. One of the reasons we did what we did in the articulation of DDMRP was that when you interact with planners and buyers, if something is not transparent, they don't trust it, especially when it produces things that are not intuitive for them. So I think to some extent, in trying to be transparent and make sure that everybody understands how things are supposed to work, somehow everyone got the impression that we're supposed to do calculations by hand every day or something like that. Okay, so no, the whole intention here was to generate transparency so that people could understand what is happening under the hood. They could say, okay, here's inputs. I expect these outputs. Yes, that's consistent with my understanding of it. Okay, so once again, my 2 cents.
I agree from a practitioner point of view. The magic word is trust. If you don't trust the output, it's never going to buy. The user will not adopt it. We'll be back with Excel spreadsheets, spending a lot of money on nice tools and working on the back of the cigarette box to confirm that the numbers are right. So it's all about trust. There has to be a balance between the two, and I think there's scope for both. The human intelligence will prevail, but definitely there's room for artificial intelligence. The size of data has just become too big to take for certain calculations by hand. It just becomes impractical.
Bernard, we can't hear you. You're on mute still, it looks like. Okay, he may be having some issues. I'll jump in here for a minute, okay? So next question, and we'll take this to the whole panel here. What were the learnings that you've taken away from the COVID-19 pandemic? What are the observations you have on supply chain in general, perspectives that you believe are going to be relevant, and how do those influence your perspective on the demand-driven MRP side? Barry, why don't we start with you?
Pretty much, I think the main learnings were that we need a lot more flexibility in our supply chains, specifically in our supply chains, in our supply plans. And something that we've done as Coca-Cola is a lot more focus on localized supply. So having a localized supply option, because you can't be dependent on long lead times exclusively.
Yeah.
Something happens on the other side of the world, you are stuck. So yes, very much a lot more flexibility and a lot more localization.
Yep.
My opinion.
Okay. Deborah?
For me, it's not about DDMRP, it's about the whole supply chain. So I think it's made everybody relook at where they get things. And exactly what you said, it's about flexibility, but it's that ability to adapt and take a look at where the variation's coming from. So us personally, it's forced us to really change how we deliver demand driven. So we've revamped all of our education material. Everything is online. We've made it very, very fast and easy to deal with people rather than being there. You get lazy being there because you have a chance to correct them, talk to them, fix it. When you have to be focused and people only have an attention span for a shorter amount of time and everybody's spread out, you've got to put things in very good sound bites that make very good order. So for us, it's changed dramatically in a good way, and I don't see anybody going back. I think it's going to force the whole world to re-examine the idea of office space. What's that going to mean? There are a lot of really good things that have come out of this if we get smart about it.
Absolutely. Deepak?
My answer would be we are still learning. We're absolutely still learning. And, I remember in the last 12 months with different places, I have continuously erred in projecting and predicting, right? I said something and then after 3 months back, I realized, oops, not true, right? I started off telling people it's a supply problem. Then we realized after 3 months, it becomes a demand problem. Then after a couple of months, it becomes supply and demand problem, right? Every one of those things, as industry leaders, we all are learning, right? That's number one. Number two, the set behavior that people have got used to for the last 20, 30 years, which was difficult to change. I have seen examples of that getting changed in a matter of few weeks. People who used to run S&OP, running them twice in a month, used to be kind of climbing a Mount Everest. The same set of customers, they have decided without any whole lot of interventions, they now run 3 times in a week. So what it tells is, there are some of these things they can do. It does not require any magic wand. And number 3, we have seen significant adoption of digital, right? Which is giving them flexibility, and everybody is kind of taking steps. The last but not the least, which is very important for a supply chain, that including from a DDMRP perspective, is where do you draw the line between resiliency versus efficiency, right? For the last 20 years, I used to be a practitioner, and then we have all said we do just in time, we do that and this, etc., so that we become very, very, very lean. Nothing wrong with it. And now the question is, because now we realize all of a sudden we need resiliency. The question is, I don't know the answer. Resiliency and efficiency, can it coexist? Is there some kind of a happy balancing? Hopefully we will find out.
Yeah. Chad, anything to add on the COVID front?
Well, I guess I'm going to be the that says, I told you so. And that is that if you go back to the very beginning of what we were warning about with regard to conventional schemas, meaning the MPS to MRP schema, given the fact that supply chains had elongated, customer tolerance times have shrunk, it placed supply chains in a very tenuous position, and the pandemic absolutely broke them. It made them incredibly brittle. Now, there were some industries that were able to benefit from the pandemic, and primarily consumer products companies. Whatever they make, they can sell. It's like they became Apple all over again, right? But I think for a lot of industries that primarily batch processors that were just running to cost and pushing, what you saw was a huge train wreck, a massive train wreck. I know personally a couple of very large companies that may not survive that train wreck. So, you know, the learning here, from my perspective, is I think it has created a very unique situation for executives to take a step back and understand, or try to understand, is there a different way to run a business? Is there a different way to shape a model that can be more resilient? And I don't necessarily buy the dilemma between resiliency and efficiency. I do if you define efficiency as cost, all right? I don't when you say efficiency in terms of total systemic efficiency, and that comes from flow. There does not have to be a dilemma. So what we have to try to do is educate people to learn the difference between utilization-based efficiency at a discrete level versus a systemic efficiency that's based on flow. If we can make that bridge, we can bring resiliency and efficiency together.
Yep.
My clients did not suffer. Yeah, my clients didn't suffer in COVID-19. And I'll tell you, I have had more interest. We've done more implementations this year. We're stretched beyond, because of exactly what Chad's saying, people realizing that to be adaptive makes you flexible. And efficiency all comes down to being that core scarce resource.
So Deborah, I was going to follow on question Chad's comments, because I think they feed right in, you know, your focus on metrics and kind of the bridge between the financial measurements and financial strategies in a given company. Talk about how companies can revise their KPIs and really learn what Chad was just talking about, that there doesn't necessarily need to be this combat between efficiency, flow, resiliency, and things like that.
There is no conflict. There's no conflict in reality, okay? What we do is we make an artificial construct. So it's our minds that are broken. We make assumptions about how to manage that are totally flawed. And we've been talking about this for 20 years, and demand-driven performance is all about that. If you think you know how to manage an environment, and that environment, let's say I know how to train a dog, and I think I know how to train a snake because I know a dog. Not the same animal. Once you move to a different animal, you have to have a different method of how you're going to manage that animal. And we've been managing poorly for years, putting everybody into a place where you think it's the normal. Once that normal, that new normal is defined, everybody's in the same platform. So what you really need to do is, you've got to end that cost efficiency struggle against making good decisions from relative to that cost mentality. That's what took us to these long extended supply chains and moving overseas. So
there is another disruption happening at this time, which is a worldwide shortage of semiconductors and electronics. So probably that results from the same logic where that moved a lot of manufacturing of semiconductors to Asia. Now, how is the demand-driven operating model helping the companies dealing with this situation when companies are typically not able to be really demand-driven because they can manufacture only what they receive when there are scarcity situations?
They can be demand-driven, Bernard. They just can't be DDMRP-driven. Okay, you can be DDMRP-driven, but you're going to get an allocation. And we saw this coming with Intel about 4 years ago. The cost, I mean, we did a very deep demand-driven workshop with a division of Intel that makes semiconductors. and they've offshored them in Asia. To bring up, they don't own them, but they basically own the contract plants because they fill about 50% of the stuff, but they push the investment offshore. They know that to bring up a new plant is billions and billions of dollars. So they wait, and they like it this way because then they can drive the prices up. Then there comes a certain point where everybody invests, and then they're cheap again, and then you're all, so it's this flood starve that's happening. But the only way that you're going to manage this is to get a very clear idea on what's the prioritized share of those scarce resources of what you do get. How and what are you going to use to build them? What's the product they're going to go into that's going to make you the most money? And then you've got to really step into that side that is demand-driven S&OP. And if you don't have that, you're not going to make good decisions.
I would just say that any system limit, okay, about what it can withstand. I think when it comes to DDMRP, you only have so much bandwidth or so much variability that can hit it. And even if you have multiple tiers of buffer, at some point those buffers are going to get eaten up, and then the real problem is going to become the effective use of capacity. And one of the things that we've been telling people for, since March is, be very, very careful how you come out of the pandemic, because you might be financially hurting, and so you can make the logical leap that people, because they're financially hurting, would focus on cost. This is the exact opposite of what you should do. If you want to make sure your company fails coming out of the pandemic, behave like that. It is fool's gold. It is a Quixotic quest. If you want to come out of the pandemic as best as you can, you have to focus on flow. And that requires a different view of how to use capacity and tie that capacity usage to the market.
And that cash flow is tied to the throughput generation of whatever it is that's scarce. So if it's the scarce circuit board, that circuit board needs to go to the product that gets you the most cash flow. If it's a scarce resource internally, then you need to use that scarce resource internally to the product that gets you the most cash flow. You can do that in the short term as profit taking and survive. In the long term, you can't do it because it may jeopardize your strategy in the market. So, but for the short term, in a case like this, the demand driven is the answer. That's exactly what you ought to be doing.
Thank you. We had a few questions regarding Matrix, and maybe I will ask the question to Barry. What are the metrics you've been following on your DDMRP rollout, and what are you focusing the attention of the teams to?
Okay. Being a fast-moving consumer goods business, our primary metric is customer service. So it's on time and full delivery, and that's our be all and end all. And where we, with the MRP, contribute to that is the in full portion, the out of stock portion. So it's very big focus on ensuring that we have stock available pretty much all the time, everywhere, and that's our single big challenge. Your point, that's also how we see if we really demand driven, because it comes through very quickly. If you're not satisfying your customer on the one hand, you're out of stock, or on the flip side of that, if you're sitting with redundancy or expiries and surplus, those are the two extremes. And as soon as we find ourselves in either of those positions, and sometimes in both of those positions with different SKUs, we know we're missing the boat. So yes, for us, our primary metric is customer service.
Any other insights on metrics as part of an implementation, maybe Deepak?
I mean, from a metrics perspective, I don't think there is anything unique for the kind of a DDMRP implementation, right? Like if you take, put yourself as the person who is responsible for the entire supply chain. He wants to make sure that he meets that fulfillment capability that he has, or promise that he has given, with the most optimum level of investment that he needs to have. You can read that as the money that he's going to put in his inventory all sorts of inventory, right? So that has been the KPI, and that, in my view, that should be the KPI. That means, will you be able to meet what you promised to the customer? Not worry about whether your forecast was accurate or not. And can you do that in the most optimum way? Optimum does not equal to making your inventory zero or making your inventory to something else. It should be the right mix that is going to give you both those parameters, or at least that is what I recommend to my clients.
What we've seen in a couple of clients is that as they came out of the lockdown period, their business started accelerated. Eric Lindstrom talked about this yesterday at Aptiv. And it really wasn't appropriate to focus on inventory levels, more important to focus on inventory days supply, because that's more of a velocity-oriented measurement. And while they saw increases in inventory, it was because they were catching up with the increased demand. They were actually seeing that their days supply were going down. So you don't want to get fooled by looking at the wrong numbers, right? Because you're going to have different scenarios playing out. And I think as we talked about, it's about flow, and it's looking at velocity and really making sure you're monitoring the right signals there.
So the key really is, ROI is ROI. It is just a very simple math formula. But the key is, how do you translate that into, I take an action that I know is going to connect, my execution is going to connect to the tactic that's going to connect to the strategy that maximizes ROI. So it's always in watching that too early, too late, too little, too much. And as long as you're working those tails, too early, too little, too late, too much, and taking the action and learning from that, then you're going to make that connection to ROI. Because it's not about the optimum, it's about the minimum investment to stay in that range of the top of the red or the bottom of the yellow.
Okay. We have several questions that are pretty recurring, which are related to, how can I know my company is a good fit for a demand-driven adaptive model? And is the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model okay for a make-to-order, make-to-stock engineering to order company? And are there any industries that just you cannot apply those principles to?
I just look at my client list, just look at what I did this morning. The whole point is there is make to order, there's make to stock, there's assemble to order, there's engineer to order. I have companies that do all four, and I have companies that only do one. You're going to have a different demand-driven operating model, but it's about the right rules and tools to manage anything that takes information, transforms it into something that becomes a product that I get, or a project I get cash for. Those rules involve human behavior and the way basic economics and physics work. So there isn't, we have every industry and 30 different ERP platforms that we've tied to over the years. So the question is get the right model design, but it doesn't matter what it is or how you're structured, they all fit.
We get this question all the time at the Demand Driven Institute. Our contact form, we should just have a separate contact form, a little drop down that says, it just auto fills the question. Where doesn't it work, right?
Artificial intelligence would help you, Chad.
Yeah, I think
basically.
Yeah. And normally when it gets passed to me, I just kind of go, oh, again. But I have a copy and paste, thing that I can do. It's real simple. It's really simple. Okay. It's not going to bring you value if your business does not experience variability, number one. If your cumulative lead time is the same as your customer tolerance time, then okay, run MRP. It's going to be great for you. All right. If those things don't apply to you, then you have to kind of say, well, maybe we should explore some of this stuff. I think that's going to cover, 99% of companies out there.
Yeah, if you've got infinite flexibility and can respond to anything that comes in the door, then you don't need this.
Right. And I hate to be the, I hate to be the guy that, that they say, oh, it doesn't matter what the question is. The answer is only, demand driven. But I'm going to say that we have a different world today than what we had 40 and 50 years ago when all of these conventional schemas and rules were laid down. It's apples to oranges. So are some of those things still relevant? Absolutely they are. But are there other things that are incredibly problematic given the circumstances that we now face? Yes, and they can absolutely kill an enterprise if they don't realize it.
And I think that goes back to everybody wants the Swiss Army knife, one solution fits every scenario. And I think as you both all talked about, it's about the application. It's about using the right tool for the right job in the right way. And the portfolio and the whole concept of what you brought forward with the demand-driven movement really gives, the tools are there, but you've got to know how to apply them in the proper way.
One more thing.
You know I love the software, Eric, and you know I know it. I can take any one of those softwares and put in a model that will absolutely drive you back to your old world. I can absolutely do that. It's all, the tools are built on the right rules to allow you to put in the right model you built with the right rules. You don't build the model right, you are not going to have a good solution and a good output. So it all comes down to my point this morning, is you get that design right and you use some very, very focused steps to do that. And if you miss any of those steps, you're going to learn if you're smart, and then you adapt. If you don't, you're going to get a plateau of mediocre.
Yeah.
Just one more thing. If anybody out there is listening to us and you get a question that says, well, where does demand-driven not work? Here's the next question. You answer a question with a question. Ask the question, okay, in situations where flow does not matter. Okay? If you don't care.
I've come across one company where it doesn't matter. They have somebody who, they have one type of product. It's totally vendor managed. They don't pay any for it. They just pull it. It's put in every day for them. Yeah. And they've got a custom design that comes to them from the client. They don't make the design, and they literally have.
If flow does not matter, demand-driven has much less value, right? So okay, all right. If flow doesn't matter, great.
But you can get there really quick by looking at some questionnaires. You can get there very fast.
If I say that in a couple of other dimensions where at least I have experience with my clients, it's not a question of most of them when they ask, the question is less about whether it is an MTO or MTS. Or it's not that question. The question is they're fundamentally trying to ask, hey, can I change? Or will my organization is ready to change? So my answers have always been, has nothing to do with the product or the type of business. It is the mindset of the decision maker, right? Every one of them, when you have a one-on-one conversations, all of them would answer, yep, I agree. But when you're going to have in the collectively, a CFO has to make a different decision than a CSO. CSO has to make a different decision than a CPO. It's not that they are not smart. It is just that they do not want to make that change and be the guy who wants to take the risk. 30% of the people probably would do. Remaining 70% require. So my conversation would be more towards what I always say as the human challenges, right? The risk averseness. That is what prevents somebody adapting demand-driven rather than either the type of business or the type of the model that they're using. That's at least my experience.
And that's our experience too. And that's the reason why in the presentation today, we have that 4-phased approach. The first phase is to basically make a business case that covers the whole supply chain. You take 60 business leaders and employees, and you give them a questionnaire, and you end up with only 15 answers, and they cover the whole supply chain. What that tells you is they're all dealing with the same problem. The minute that they see that the core problem is coming from something that they can tackle together, you get some cohesion. So if you can get an agreement on what the core problem is, then get agreement on what the solution direction is, and then help them to craft the solution so it answers their concerns inside their environment, that's how we get through that change management very, very quickly. It's taken years and years to get there, but that's really, yeah, that's it.
To get further down that path and because we see more and more traction on DDMRP, and we have a question that says, well, DDMRP is now more and more known to the supply chain or supply chain community, operations managers, etc. But still, we do not necessarily have a good awareness about the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model that corporations, leadership teams, or investor communities. How do we get more traction and make sure or facilitate the fact that the demand-driven model becomes mainstream? I would say.
I think it's a matter of time. We continue to write. We're working on our adaptive S&OP book as we speak right now. We know that we have to make that connection to the executive. Early on in DDMRP's journey, and demand-driven journey, period, it was more of a bottom-up kind of thing. It was buyers and planners, reading books and looking at stuff online and starting to make a change and bringing attention in their organization to where somebody said, hey, wait, what's going on here? But we know we have to attack from the other side, and we have been engaged in doing that. It just takes a while to generate the articulation and all of the entire construct. We think we've got a great final construct here, and we should have the new book out here in just a few months. But Deepak, you had an excellent comment about change management, and particularly when it comes to the leadership suite. In our job, I really view it as the Institute's job to take those executives or create a message for those executives where when they look at the demand-driven construct, they don't see risk. They see risk in not doing it. All right. That's when we get the tipping point. Right now you get, you get the standoffish nature or the skepticism because they still view this as change that is risky. Now, and I think the pandemic has helped this out dramatically. Now, what we have to do is we have to show them that that not changing brings with it the greater risk. That's our job.
I agree. And also, to that is, this needs to become part of the mainstream education as well. In universities and specifically in executive development programs. I mean, it's MBAs and all executives do some kind of executive training and studies and the like. And this needs to be full part of that. So they get some insights from outside of the organization. Because to your point, it's always been a bottom-up approach. It's been pushing from the bottom. And unfortunately, they tend to buy in easier to something that comes from external than what comes from internally in the organization. That's why. Yeah,
Barry, and it's great, the great comment to bring academia into this. And I will say this is we are just about to announce something here very shortly. And that is that we will be launching an academic program comprised of several international universities. We will have an academic advisory board. The idea here is that we will have what are called academic affiliates. We have some already signed up. They will each send a member to our academic advisory board. The idea here is to help us direct research projects, to help us build curriculum, and both at the graduate and undergraduate level. And so we're going to have institutions starting out in the United States, in Europe, and in India. And we hope that they can liaise with each other and build a stronger net of what to do with this. There is inertia in academia. I think we all know that, right? Oh, yeah. We have to systematically break that down. And now what we're seeing is a lot of higher institutions of higher learning coming to us and saying, how can we get this to our students? So we've crafted what we think is a great offer to be able to allow full-time students access to our content for for a really nominal amount of money, and as well as their ability to test for certification. So we know that we have to build also from the bottom up, because when those kids graduate, we want them going, okay, where's the DDMRP system, or where's the DDS&OP system? I don't like that system. I want this system. Okay.
Just two comments on that. If you go back and look at the first book, it was a grant study, because I went to teaching because I couldn't get the Clorox company, who I was director of finance for, to pay for me to go to the Gold Red Institute, because I was so fascinated with the gold. That first book came out of it. Next book came out of Apex. I was still teaching. Developed curriculum, got professors involved. Then went into consulting because I could actually learn how to do it. It was a theory. It wasn't how to do it. Demand driven's come out of that. So I'm a little more patient about this because I see where it came. DDI got born because the idea that we wanted to create an education and say, hey, we have market at the bottom, something everybody can use. Everybody can use DDMRP. You'll get some bang for the buck. The rest of it, your point about the supply chain, you can't do a full demand-driven operating model, DDS&OP, and tie it to the top if you don't have top participation. You've got to get that. So for us, when I look at it, I don't even look, if I don't have the top, I don't go in, because I don't do just DDMRP. We do the whole thing. I mean, it's just not our niche. If the whole thing for you is DDMRP, if you're a distributor and you're big, we're happy to do that. But it's about getting that message at a higher and higher level. And you've already got, this last year, I had 4 people leave companies that were clients of mine. They went somewhere else. They took us along. I got into coaching because of them taking us along. So it's happening, and it's happening. Do we want it to happen at a faster rate? Yes. But the cool thing is the education is there, and the materials, the things I was sharing with you today, the ability to make a full demand-driven operating model is not easy, but it isn't hard if you follow the right process, the right path, and the right rules. So, and it's there, and DDI is doing an awesome job of getting everybody to understand that. If you get the right rules, the tools, and then you have good education material, then those metrics are critical. You've got to end that efficiency cost fight. And the way to do that is to get those metrics where people can see them and get the idea about where does forecast belong and where does cost world belong, out looking at a projected cost. And then I'm looking at an investment. I'm not making it a product cost. So we're getting there.
There was a specific question related to that, because earlier on this conference, on the first day, we had a demo of forecasting software that is partnering with DATEC. So what is your perspective on how the forecasting process should be embedded?
We use forecast. We just don't use it to drive making something. Okay. We use forecast to size those buffers. And there are environments where I have a client who buys something that's rare. He'll buy everything he can get, whether there's a forecast or not, because he never knows when he's going to get it, and it's a scarce mineral and it only comes from one place. You have to have, this is where artificial intelligence isn't going to help you. This is where you have to make that connection with the strategy and why I do things the way I do them. And that is what we put together when you do a DDS&OP team and that demand-driven, you move to an adaptive enterprise. The DDS&O team is really the top person from every part of the supply chain and someone who has the guts and knows what's going on. The guts people are the modeling team. They make that recommendation to the top. They show you, here's what's happening, too little, too early, too much, too late. Here's what's the biggest block of flow. This is what we need to go after. Limit your projects and say, get that team to say yes. Assign that project, run it like a project, and then check on it at that team meeting every time. Did you get it done? When you get it done, then you get a cycle time shrink. You get a block out. Go back and tune your model. Take advantage of the opportunity you just gained. You don't gain anything if you don't go adjust those buffers, if you don't go change those routings or those standards. So all those things happen because there's a routinized flow. So, and that is the game. That is where you get a 6x growth with a 0.8x increase in inventory. That's where you can go from 150 million to 2.5 billion in 5 years. That's where you can get bought for 26 times what you got paid for. I mean, that's the game. That is what demand driven is. And that's the place that's where the gold is.
There you go. Well, we're going to have to wrap up. We are at the end of our session. I want to thank our panelists, Chad, Deborah, Deepak, Barry, Bernard. Thanks for your job in your support and facilitating here. This is the end of the conference. I do think this qualifies as the world's most riveting panel discussion. I think you all did a great job of answering some very provocative and interesting questions that I think our attendees will really benefit from. So thanks so much for taking the time to meet with our audience today.